Punisher Season 2, Episode 1.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money, you got the blues. When you ain't got no money.
Welcome back, fellow Defenders. We're back with The Punisher, Season 2, Episode 1 on Netflix. This is Episode 206 of Defenders TV Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Derek.
Hello there, fellow Defenders. Welcome back. Yes, and I am your other host for this podcast, John. Unfortunately, Chris cannot make it for this episode, but he will be here for Episode 2, whereas I am likely off with work and won't be around for the Episode 2 podcast. But welcome back. It has been a long time to an extent for those people who haven't been following on with our Strange Tales comic book coverage on Defenders TV podcast. It was with Daredevil Season 3, yes, where we unfortunately as well had the sad news that that was the last Daredevil that will appear on Marvel Netflix. It also poses, I suppose, the question and probably the answer, although we have had nothing formal as of yet, that this may be the last season of The Punisher as well.
Yeah.
So it is almost like The Punisher has taken a machine gun to the Marvel Netflix shows. They are dropping like fallen heroes, dare I say it, at the moment.
But that's probably going to be the last time we actually mention this being the last season of The Punisher. We don't want to grey all of our coverage of this podcast and each of the episodes by going, as the last season of The Punisher,
Absolutely.
This episode means blah, or anything like that. We're not going to talk about it much. If we do get confirmation that this is the final season, of course, we're going to talk about that, but nothing's been confirmed right now. We're watching this as 13 episodes of the second season of The Punisher. As you can see from this first episode, we spend time outside of New York here, so it does have a wholly different feel from the other Marvel shows. We know it was signed up differently to Marvel, and even more interestingly, we recorded the last episode of our Punisher Season 1 coverage back in February of last year. So this is one of the first of the shows that is only a year apart between the last time we did our coverage of it and the next season. So slightly out of line with the release of Season 1, which was actually in 2017. But hey, at least we're not more than a year since the coverage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting times for this second season of The Punisher. I mean, I can't wait to get back into it. I really enjoyed the more adult aspect of Punisher Season 1.
Yeah.
This is a more violent show. It certainly doesn't pull its punches in any way.
And it does feel like it's not specifically based on a comic book either. It does feel like it has taken some inspiration from the comic book character and kind of spun out a new universe, a new world for this Frank Castle to appear in, as opposed to a lot of the other books that take direct arcs from the comic books and direct panels from the comic books. This feels like Frank Castle in our world as the Punisher.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think this is a cracking show, so I cannot wait to crack on into it. Just before we get into our spoiler-filled review, though, fellow Defenders, please remember that you can find us for all things The Punisher over on DefendersTVPodcast.com, where you can sign up, subscribe, rate us, and leave a review of the podcast on any good or evil podcast catcher of your choice. If you head on over to our website, then you can grab Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or Google Podcasts.
Absolutely. And while you're over there, over at our website at DefendersTVPodcast.com, you can also leave any voicemail message for us that you want to about any of the episodes of this season of The Punisher. There's 13 episodes to go. We're just on episode 1 right now. I'm recording it a little bit in advance of the release date. So obviously if you want to send us any thoughts about any of the episodes, just mark them with the episode you're talking about or the full season, and we'll save it for that episode to put it into our coverage on the podcast. If you want to join us over in our Facebook group as well, you can join us at facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV Podcast, where we'll be putting up a spoiler post for each of the episodes as we watch them, where we can discuss all of your thoughts about them and use it on the podcast.
Yeah, it's a great way to start 2019, part of the Marvel Netflix community over on Defenders TV podcast on Facebook. And remember, old school mail, you can send in your feedback at email through feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com.
Old school mail. I love it.
Is.
That used to be postal. Now that's electronic mail. It's old school mail.
Old school.
Well, let's get into the details for this episode. This first episode, as always, with the good Marvel Netflix shows, the first episode was written by the showrunner Steve Lightfoot, back again after season 1 of Punisher. As always, it's a pretty good sign if the showrunner is writing the first episode of the second season. He stayed on board from season 1. So if you enjoyed season 1, pretty likely that his message is going to be the one that takes you through season 2 as well, right?
Yeah, this is Derek's Law of Marvel Netflix. The showrunner for each of these Marvel Netflix shows normally take the first and last episode as a minimum for the show to be any good. And so far, that's pretty much happened with all of them, with one exception, which was season 1 of Iron Fist.
Yeah.
But we still enjoyed that.
Yes.
So it's not a completely 100% watertight rule by any stretch of the imagination, but it's nice to see the showrunners dipping their feet into the nitty-gritty of the writing of some of these episodes, and certainly these big ones such as the opening show and the final show, to bring them in and to send them off respectively. Derek, what about the director for this episode?
Yes, the director of this episode was Jim O'Hanlon from Dublin, Ireland, much like ourselves.
Yeah, excellent stuff.
Yeah, he directed episode 10 of season 1. Do you remember that episode where the interviews are being held by Mahoney in the hotel, which each individual member of the crew, we had Karen Page in there, we had Billy Russo in the room, we had Dina Madani, all telling their stories about what happened in that episode. And I think it's one of those episodes that really stood out from season 1.
Yeah, really nice kind of structure to it. Really just so well done with all those different perspectives of the same showdown that happened there. Yeah, great episode.
Yeah, and I can kind of see why he's brought back for the first 2 episodes of this season episode 1 and 2, Jim O'Hanlon's back. He also directed 2 episodes of the excellent Inside Number 9 last year. If you haven't heard of Inside Number 9, check it out. It's an excellent comedy, dark horror series, maybe?
Dark comedy, yeah, from the guys that brought you the League of Gentlemen, which is, it's kind of dark horror comedy, really. So, yes, not for the faint-hearted,
no.
A bit like The Punisher, in all honesty. True. So, I think if you like a bit of dark humor, please check out Inside Number 9 as well.
Absolutely. And John, do you want to tell us what Steve Lightfoot and Jim O'Hanlon gave us for this episode of The Punisher with your synopsis?
Sure. Pete Castiglione is a free man and on the road, travelling from town to town as a drifter. Elsewhere, Sergi Konchesky is bound to a chair and is being tortured by a man in black who is looking for information and a laptop. At Lola's Roadhouse bar in Michigan, Pete becomes embroiled with 2 young women over a few beers. At the bar, he is dismissed as rough road by a woman called Amy, who is carrying a bag containing a laptop and who dislikes his unwarranted attention. However, Drifter Pete has more luck with another woman that night as he connects with the bartender Beth and is persuaded to stay in town another day. The next night, at the bar, while Soul still plays, violence takes center stage as Pete finds himself rushing to help the young girl Amy, who is in something she knows nothing about and in way over her head. As the fight spills out into the bar, inner Frank Castle is unleashed on Lola's. Meanwhile, in New York, as Dina Madani leaves the hospital room of Billy Russo, his eyes open, staring back from behind the mask.
Great synopsis of what's going on in this first episode. Much slower kind of start episode for this season, but we need to know the new normal. We need to know what's going on with Frank Castle. Last season dealt so much with what happened at the fallout of Daredevil season 2, where Frank Castle first appeared, that you kind of need to set it all back up and see a reason why Frank would need to go back out into the fighting turf again, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, for me, not to start crossing my metaphors or anything, but feels very much like a tale of 2 halves, really. It is quite slow to begin with, but then it really ramps on up right at towards the end of this episode. So yeah, it's very much an episode that is contrasting of how it reintroduces Frank to the audience, for sure.
Yeah, and I have to say their choice to do that opening moment with Amy and Frank pulling off covered in blood in the car, or in the van, it's quite a good idea to do that right at the start so that you can kind of go, well, this is where we're aiming for, but we need to show you all of these characters first to get you to that point. Let's get into bullet point number 1. What does freedom mean to a man like Castle? Where we left it at the end of last season was that Pete Castiglione is now a free man. He's been set free on the world, can do whatever he wants to. And the question that was posed by the head of the FBI was, what does freedom mean to Castle? What would he do if he's now free? And what we find is, well, he kind of becomes a bit of a drifter, takes his van on the road all around America. He's gone through Michigan, and I love that moment when Beth, the bartender that he's chatting to behind the bar, is kind of asking him, what's your plan? And he goes, well, I'm just passing through this town. She goes, and where are you passing through to? And he goes, well, the next town I'm passing through, is basically his whole description. It really felt like something out of Jack Reacher for me. I've read loads of the Lee Child Jack Reacher books, and it's always starts off as he goes into town for some very simple reason, whether it's to find a former relative or something like that, and then suddenly he gets embroiled in a whole situation that's going on just by talking to one or two people in the town. And that's what this really felt like. And I love that. I think that's exactly the right way to pitch Frank Castle. There's obviously going to be some inevitable comparisons to the very old 80s Incredible Hulk series, where you had the drifter that was David Bruce Banner traveling around America, falling in and out of situations. But this feels like a really good starting point for Frank Castle to get him back on his road of vengeance and killing, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it feels really natural, given that the end of last season, it was, you will go under the name of Pete, and you will stay under our radar as police enforcement. And in fact, they have stripped all his records from the police enforcement databases. So it makes sense to me that you could see Castle in this kind of drifter type role where he's moving from town to town, and so on. And I think it works nicely with the kind of anti-hero or hero that he is. He has that, as you say, Jack Reacher type of approach, where the people he saves in a sense are chanced upon rather than him looking for it. And I mean, the great thing is that this first part as well is so intimate. It's about Frank enjoying a beer, enjoying the music in Lola's Roadhouse bar. It's him interacting with normal people, sort of toning it back somewhat. It's him with Beth ultimately as well. And I really like this moment because the moments with Beth, he talks to her about, I want this to be honest. And so introduces that his name is actually Frank. Yeah. It's that idea that Frank is an honest guy, yet he is being told by the CIA, the FBI, Homeland Security that he should use Pete.
I love that description of it where he says, powerful people get to not be embarrassed and I get to be Pete. And then kind of laughs and goes, it's not the worst name in the world, could have chosen Eugene as the name I had to live
exactly.
by.
But it's a nice play on, the multiple names that Frank has been assigned. He's assigned another one in the put down of Rough Road by a young lady who's entered into this bar as well. She's at the bar next to Frank, and he's kind of looking at her because she seems a little agitated, and she doesn't want the attention, and so she calls him Rough Road. In that, your face looks like 40 miles of Rough Road.
Yeah, and a tough paper round, as we call it.
Yeah, exactly. It's so, I really like this, and it's really quite personal and quite slow as well. Some people could be really concerned about just how relaxed this feels, but I like it. I really do. And I think, certainly it doesn't stay relaxed for long, but we will come back to that in some of our later bullet points, for absolute sure. Yeah. And I mean, then there's a little hint of the Frank that we know with, Beth being kind of, harassed a little by a drunk guy at the bar. She's, asking him to just shut up. He's insisting, and it all, starts to spiral, and we kind of see a little thumb war going on really between this guy and Frank. So, it's, it's a little hint of Frank there. And even when he's back at Beth's, and they're sharing a nice Jim Beam whiskey, or a little whiskey watch there, you see the scars on his body, you see his chain with his wedding ring around it, and there is this lovely conversation between Beth and between Frank. It really just sets up Frank again, his background very neatly, and really nicely in an intimate moment, because it is that thing for me where you go, you don't expect the Punisher to have that intimacy with someone. You know how important his wife was. You know how violent he is. But then you see him as well with Beth's son, Rex, and they all go for pancakes in the morning over breakfast. She asks him to stay for another day, another night, come back to the bar the following night. And he does in the end. But it's that nice moment where you see that normalcy, that Frank is always looking for. Wants. Now he wants it with his dead wife and child, but ultimately it's coming to play here, with Beth and Rex. And I think it's a really nice sort of mirror onto, the soul of Frank as to what he wants ultimately. But generally things spiral so that he never has that.
Yeah. I have to say, I think the whole scene is put together really well. This isn't a 20-year-old Frank Castle going out and finding a girl to hook up with in a bar. This is two people at an older time in their life where they have kids, they've gone through relationships before, and it just feels like a much more honest moment in this show where we have this. I love the fact they're intercutting the sex scene between Frank and Beth with the conversations. And I love the fact that she's asking him questions and he's given answers, not very deep answers, but we as the audience are seeing flashbacks to things from the previous season so that, just in case you can't remember some of the things that happened in the last season, we're actually seeing them visually, getting those cues of what exactly he's talking about, where he did get all of those scars and all of those bullet holes, the people that he fought against in the past, all of the things that we've seen him go through, just getting us up to date on them. I'm not sure whether it took too much time to do that in the episode. I just felt the scenes were so well put together. I didn't really mind having to recap that before we got on to the next scenes. I think it's important to kind of reset your main character in these scenes. And it would make sense. You'd have those conversations with somebody, really, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a really important thing just to keep that continuity of the character, because there is that through line of Frank from season 1 to season 2. And some people, if they're only picking it up in season 2, well then I think that recap is just nice. And I think how it's done is really nice. And it contrasts with later on in this episode. It's a more intimate and personal way of exploring what Frank wants by actually, for 12 hours having it, and then it kind of really disintegrating around him because of him staying around. And again, it probably plays into his psychology that anything he touches now ends off in violence, and that there's these two conflicting sides of the Punisher. One where he maybe enjoys that mad dog element that comes out, that inner Frank Castle. And then there is the family side, the husband side, the father side that, he also knows and looks back on fondly and to some extent wants that. So it's kind of like competing, sides of Frank, really. In a sense, almost slightly schizophrenic, in a way.
A little bit. He's able to cover over that version of Frank Castle with this personality of Pete Castiglione, really, I love that moment where he's talking to Rex and sees that he's wearing the hockey shirt and goes, "Oh no, I'm a big stranger in your house and maybe I don't like the same hockey team as you do. Maybe I'm a Rangers fan." And he goes, "Are you?" And he goes, "Yeah." And the kid goes, "Oh, your team is awful." It's a great moment because it just shows the trust building between Frank and the kid. Nice little moment and just shows the kind of person Frank is. He always wants to take care and protect people, and that's the kind of character he is. So it's good to see that at the beginning of the episode. Let's get on to bullet point number 2. A short point for this episode, but probably going to build into our big central dynamic for the series, really. We see Sergi Konchesky, tied to a chair and pretty brutally beaten, by a man in black who we don't know the character yet. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of him, and we see a little bit more of him later in the episode, but we don't really know what's going on. Their dynamic here. We do know that the man in black has been looking for something. Konchesky himself was looking for something, and the people who were supposed to deliver it for him, it seems to be some kind of photographs, didn't deliver because they were all killed.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea who the man in black is, who is kind of torturing, beating Konchesky up, but it all links back to Amy, the girl at Lola's Roadhouse bar with Frank calling him, Rough Road, because the phone goes mid-torture, and the man in black gives it to Konchesky to answer. And on the other side, we have Amy saying that, you know, there were a group of them that had gone to get this laptop, to get these pictures, and that the people that she was with had also been killed. So I think by the man in black here. So all this information is coming to this guy torturing Konchesky, who then arranges a false meet, because as soon as the phone is put down, then the piece that has been promised to him by this guy is given to Konchesky as he's kind of throttled with one of those sleeper holes where he goes into unconsciousness. But
an interesting touch, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the death of him, of the character, as the camera pulls back, we see that there's a cross on his neck after the choke move has been done. I'm wondering if all of the women that were killed, that Amy escaped from, I wonder if all of them have some form of cross mark on their neck from their ways of being killed as well.
It's an interesting symbol there, and, you know, what does it refer to? I mean, for me, I have no idea. That was the thing. You saw this cross, but then it was so subtle. I was like, is that just part of, like, this actor's skin? And then I was like, oh, and there's 2 dots here. I was like, is that an injection mark? So it's very subtle, the cross on the neck from my side, from what I could remember. But certainly, I have no idea what that refers to in the Marvel Comics universe.
Oh, don't know that at all, must say. And if I did, we couldn't say it this episode because we don't know who the man in black is. So we'll talk about that later on in the series as we get there. It just does feel like one of those type of serial killers, or as comic book goes, a comic book villain that might have that as their calling card after they kill somebody. Really interesting idea. And I love the setup here where they have Amy also going back to the Roadhouse, Frank being set up to go back to the Roadhouse. Of course, Beth's going to be there because she works there. So I like converging all of these characters
really
together.
Nice. Really nice sort of moment there of this convergence on the Roadhouse.
I know both of us just want to say Roadhouse, just like Patrick Swayze. I know we do.
Patrick Swayze, yeah. Really nice. But on to bullet point 3, because of course, when they all get together, we have the knife fight in Lola's. So really, you know, it does all kick off effectively. Amy is there, you know, waiting for this contact to come so she can hand over the laptop. I mean, she ultimately wants out. She wants her money, and she wants out of this. But the man in black sends this group of people, and ultimately they corner her in the ladies' toilet, in the bathroom there. And we get this like fantastic ladies' loo fight, where Frank comes in to save Amy. You know, he gets involved. This is the moment where he purely on chance is thrown into Amy's life, and what is playing out in the ladies' loo. There's some great moments here. It's all done with knives in the toilet because of, you know, they want to keep it low, hush hush. Now that kind of rapidly falls by the wayside once the fight moves from the bathroom into the main bar. But there are some really nice and some really brutal scenes here, involving, sink basins.
Absolutely. I have to say, I do love that starting point with Jon Bernthal. I love how he plays that kind of the ears perking up as he realizes the kind of change in the room as this knife gang start to arrive and start to go after Amy. You know, it's a very packed room. This band seems to be quite popular, the one that's on stage. It's very packed, but he notices that there's 3 or 4 people like sharks working their way through this ocean of people to meet Amy. And we see him use the wonderful old trick of being the drunk guy at a party and your girlfriend has gone to throw up in the bathroom, you know, to get in there. Really cool starting point. And the movements in the bathroom. I know, John, I've known you for years. Obviously, I know you watching these shows, particularly knives are the things that get you. How did you feel with everybody in the room having a knife slashing at each other?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I can't think of anything worse than pointy knives. Like it's the sound of them squelching in. Oof. It's the turn. It's the cuts. It's whatever, and there were a few moments, not just in the loo as well. I mean, you had that wonderfully played riff on, the Joker from The Dark Knight, except this time it's not a pencil. It's not a sharpened pencil. It's a knife. And that was like, oh, okay. I mean, I'm probably going to get frightened of sinks and hand basins because it's just like, stop chucking people's heads against these glazed bathroom items. It's just the crunch. It's the sound effects, because they all just make it so visceral. You hear the crunch of that guy's head. Yeah. It's like when the lady is thrown through the toilet cubicle. It's just the sound. It's just like, wow, that really, really hurts. And sometimes it's almost like a disconnect, because the sound, the action just seems so visceral. It seems so painful. And yet they get up, and I'm like going, I would just stay on the floor. I mean, I really would. I would just kind of go, nah, I'm going to pretend to be unconscious here. What is the point? Do
you think the reason the sound gets to you is because your eyes are closed for a lot of these scenes as the attacks are going on? Because there is that wonderful moment when the bouncer for the bar picks up one of the guys and smacks him off the bar. And you're kind of going, is that guy in traction? Because the camera is lingering right there, and you're going, has he gone to hospital after that scene? Are they taking these stunts this far that actual stuntmen are getting smacked off the top of stuff? I've seen WWE for years, and these moves are much, much harder than those ones.
But that's it. It's just, you look at the action, you look at the stunt being done, and you just think, that must hurt. Yeah. Just where the bouncer of the bar takes one of the guys, and it's like he snaps him over the bar counter, and it's just so brutal. Yeah. I mean, it really is. You were talking about drunk Frank, playing it up drunk, to try and get in and find out what's going on, these gang members, to sort of lower their guard. But I really do, like how he sort of wraps his belt around his forearm, and the woman with the knife is just like saying, what are you doing? Are you like just an amateur kind of thing? And then you later hear, that he was really good. He was well trained kind of thing. It was a really nice point, in that. But yeah, this fight is just so epically real. I mean, it is tough to watch sometimes. And I think, if this is the standard of the fight scenes in The Punisher, I think we're in for a treat, because I think they're going to be, really inventive with how they use the environment to tear a strip out of each other.
I totally agree, because we've seen like bar brawls back from the 70s. You see that kind of stuff all the time, but I love how, the room is cleared. I love how everything moves through into the bar, and everything is just being destroyed all around them. There's some really brutal moments. As I said, Ringo, the bouncer, when he's being attacked by one of the women with her knife, where she's just poking at him like he's a balloon, just waiting for him to pop. It's really tough to see this guy that's just doing his job, just getting poked at with this knife, really bad. The shotgun comes out, and we see Beth takes a bullet, from across the bar, because she's trying to shoot the shotgun to protect her premises, Frank has stepped into the middle of this. And one of the things that Jon Bernthal does better than anybody else, and did right the way throughout season 1, is just that visceral scream when he's really getting into that fight, when he's getting in and knows that he's up against solid opponents like he is in this fight. You hear that really guttural groan from him, where that Frank Castle's coming back. This is no longer Pete Castiglione. This is the Frank Castle Punisher coming back.
Yeah, and you see it on the video footage of the fight in the bar, where he kind of collects himself. He's just kind of taken out a couple of these gang people, and he's just kind of collecting himself, and he's like going, oh, it's almost like a bark kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. It's a nice little touch from Jon Bernthal as to how he differentiates here between Pete and Frank.
Or Punisher and Frank, I suppose.
Or Punisher and Frank, yeah, exactly.
But it doesn't end there. We have Frank taking Beth and taking Amy into the Punisher van, and they go to find a hospital to bring Beth. And we see even more of the violence. I love this gone from effectively inside one cubicle when Amy was caught first, right the way out onto the streets when one car pulls in front of Frank, one car pulls in the other. You hear Amy kind of crying, going, oh, what are you going to do now? You're completely blocked off. And Frank just takes out a gun, shoots everybody in front, crashes the van into the car behind him and shoots everybody in that, and then gets back in and goes, find the hospital. That's what your job is, you know? Don't you worry about all the people in the way. I'm going to just kill them, basically. He's gotten really heavily involved with Amy's situation without really knowing much about it, hasn't he?
Yeah, it's a real nice moment where it connects to the opening scene of this episode, because you just think it is Frank and Amy. But then here we see that he has another passenger in the form of Beth, who's bleeding out. She's taken a shot to the shoulder and he's looking to get her to hospital. So he's getting boxed in, and it's that kind of, you know, survival here, because the moment where he gets out and effectively does that execution of the two guys in the vehicle, through the front windshield is, again, it's just like, okay, this is where we're going with the Punisher. It is, uncompromising. It's all out, and it's going to be in your face. You know, this is showing that if you have military training and you're in a civilian surrounding and you're being attacked, and you put that knowledge, that tactical training, that physical training, that marksmanship training, everything, then to survive, it's going to be really brutal and uncompromising. I think sets out the stall nicely.
Yeah, I think so.
But obviously, following all of that uncompromising compassionlessness of Frank Castle, you see the compassion of him where he gets Beth to hospital and he leaves her. Now, he's not going to hang around like the guys racing Beth into hospital are asking him to do, because it's a gun wound. But, you know, you see, it's this dichotomy, it's this contrast of Frank Castle. You know, he will get out of the van and shoot two people point blank through the windshield in order to take Beth, who he's spent an intimate personal night with the night before, to hospital, because she has gotten in the way of Frank being in the way, effectively. But Beth is left at hospital. And I suppose moving on to bullet point 4 then, we come back to the bar and we see the local lieutenant, I think it was.
Yeah, it looks like the local police lieutenant,
and this man in black, this bad guy who we don't know who it is at the moment.
Yeah. We have no real idea. We know that he's now found everything he needs to find. He's there. He's at the bar. The bag that Amy was carrying, which has the laptop in it and potentially the photographs, has been delivered to him by the girl who originally attacked Amy in the bathroom. But interestingly, he pays no mind to it at all. She thinks, well, that could actually solve everything. He's obviously hired this group out, the Knives Gang, to do this job for him, and they haven't delivered. So he doesn't seem very impressed with this idea that just because they got the bag back, everything's fine. But he covers over the whole fight and all the deaths of everybody there pretty quickly. He talks to the lieutenant and just says, oh, just say it was a turf war. Those happen. And that'll cover everything up for you. There was not a huge amount of bullets that were out there, but he thinks that that'll sort it out. He's obviously got a lot of power.
Yeah.
A very powerful kind of guy. The lieutenant does go along with him, even though he's saying to him, this is not what I signed up for. But he obviously has quite a lot of power in him.
Yeah, it's really interesting seeing this, because it is, who is this guy? You know, as you say, you kind of feel that's the end of it. When the lady comes back with the bag and says she dropped it outside the window of the bathroom when she was trying to get away, you're kind of thinking, you've got what you were looking for. This was the whole point.
Yeah.
But he is transfixed by Frank beating up the people that he sent to pick up the laptop and get Amy. You know, we have him say somebody's dog has been let off the leash, and you can't, it's like an admiration, and you're going, so why are you suddenly going after Frank Castle?
Yeah.
When that wasn't your aim? What's the reason for that? So that's a really interesting thing that we need to kind of pull apart as the episodes move forward in the season. Is why has this guy suddenly decided that he's more interested in Frank Castle or the Punisher than what it was he was after? Who does he work for? Is he someone who's got a boss, or is he the powerful man? And, you know, how far does his sort of tentacles stretch here. We see he can possibly bribe or threaten a local police lieutenant, but does it go further here? You know, ultimately we know that Frank has, as it says, powerful enemies who he needs to keep quiet in the form of CIA, Homeland Security. Is this another one of those covert, powerful men who recognizes his work effectively on the screen of the video capture of Frank Castle? So, you know, is it going to be military related again, or special agent related,
or special ops related,
or special
maybe,
ops related? It'll be really interesting.
Yeah, and one of the other things as well is that this guy also tells the lieutenant to keep his men away, which I think is quite interesting. He tells him to cover up the death of all of these people, call it a turf war, and keep your men away. So not only has he found Frank Castle, or is he going to go after Frank Castle, he's taking the police officers out of it. The local police are not going to be going after Frank Castle for this and these killings. It seems like Man in Black wants to have Frank left for himself. So really interesting to see what happens with that character coming up in the next episode.
Yeah, or is it just simply a foil and he may be over before he's begun?
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, but speaking of whether he's the big bad or not, you know, moving to bullet point 5, we see that Russo is still alive, but not through his eyes, at least not initially. But we see Drinky Madani, who is taking a swig of something in her hip flask. She's wearing blue as well. I mean, I thought this was quite interesting. It was like she'd been demoted down to kind of a regular police officer, but I don't think that's the case. I think she's just wearing kind of sort of semi-uniform or something in this moment.
Well, where we left her last season was she was in bed. She'd just been taken out by Russo, had been shot by him, and she's in bed recovering in the hospital as Frank was being set free effectively and being told that he could call himself Pete Castiglione and that he didn't have to go to prison for anything that he'd done. Madani was still in bed there, and what we see in this scene is her drinking away, but also carrying a bag full of clothes. So potentially this is her last day in hospital. She's just recovered and was in the same hospital as Russo and wanted to say goodbye to him before she left.
Yeah, but she is taking a good old drink over the bed.
And the big question, though, is, after having that drink, or while having that drink, is she the one that drew the mask on Billy Russo's face?
Well, that was the thing. I was like looking at the mask going, okay, I can't imagine that the hospital would put him in something like that. And then as you look at it, I mean, it's very cool, but when you look at it, it has been drawn on, like the teeth and the scars, and you're kind of going, okay, yeah, is this Dina Madani that's put it on while she's been drinking, looking over him? Is it some kind of joke from the NYPD who are guarding his room? I can't imagine that it's coming from the hospital, but yeah.
It's like the really elaborate thing of, you know, shaving one of your mate's eyebrows when he falls asleep drunk, you know. It's kind of like that. But
or putting his hand into some hot water so that he wees the bed.
Exactly, yes.
I don't know if that works or whether that is simply a urban myth, but certainly it would be quite funny to see Ben Russo. It probably gets what he deserves.
Probably. I think he deserves a bit more than that, though, to be honest. And I like the idea that underneath this mask is the wrecked face of Ben Russo after what Frank Castle did for him. And now they're making that sit on the outside on this mask, whether it's Dina Madani or the NYPD. But I like the idea that she seems to be pretty proud of whatever she's done as she leaves. So maybe underneath it, there's a moustache drawn on his face as well. But you never know. I like the scene. It's a nice little moment. I want to see.
Was he?
Exactly. Yeah. I definitely want to see more of Drinky Madani in the next episode.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously the eyes, you know, as she leaves, closes the door behind her, the camera focuses in and the eyes open as Ben Russo wakes up for the first time, or was just pretending to be asleep, because he's bound to the bed and so on. But yeah, it'd be interesting because just to see the full extent of his destroyed face, you know, how healed has it been? So yeah, really looking forward to seeing that for sure.
Yeah, obviously only one episode gone by. Looking forward to lots more throughout this season of Punisher. The only note we had really was your whiskey watch note, John.
Yeah, where Beth serves Jim Beam at her house for Frank and herself just before they go from a short toddy to a bit of totty. And yeah, it's to, you know, bit of older loving going on in The Punisher.
I have to say that I don't think I've seen Jon Bernthal look better on TV than he does in this episode. You know, got to remember throughout season 1 of The Punisher, he was just getting beaten every episode. Every episode was coming back with more and more bruises and cuts. Before that, it was 2 seasons or 3 seasons of The Walking Dead, where it was just more and more muck being piled on him and a beard growing by the end of it, you know, and blood all over him. So think, you know, seeing him just go to a bar for a couple of beers in the first episode was like, oh, there's Frank Castle. There's a Jon Bernthal underneath.
Well, he does look really top notch, at the moment, for sure. And certainly Beth, there's a lucky lady, no doubt, I would say, on this front.
And one final note from me. Amy calls Frank Rough Road at the start of the episode. That's 40 Miles of Rough Road, a song by Duane Eddy, back from the late 50s, early 60s. So, I don't know where she knows the song from. Maybe that plays into her character. Maybe her father or grandfather were people that were into this type of music potentially, and that's where she heard it from. But I do like that that's where she's picking it up from. Your 40 Miles of Rough Road.
Yeah. I mean, the only other note I have is the distinctive cat picture in Beth's house as well, which for some reason my eyes were drawn to.
It was a weird one.
It was a weird one. I think it was a cat in a ruff or something around, or it looked like the cat had a distinctive mustache of sorts that kind of, you know, would be suggestive of a certain politician or leader from the 1930s in Europe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
interesting.
so but in a ruff as well. So
okay.
I don't know whether it was choir cat or what it was, but it just looked like really awful.
It's a very
home
strange cat. I
decoration.
definitely recognized the cat with the ruff on it. Maybe her son painted in school or something.
Yeah.
Maybe it was Rex that did it.
It may have been.
Bit of an odd one.
It's amazing how weirdly your attention gets focused on a certain thing. You know, we know about Chris's OCD and how things have to be of a certain way from the podcast. Whereas I think for me, it's probably, I do look critically at the interior decoration and go, nah, not for me.
Have that?
I wouldn't have a picture of a cat in a ruff.
I kind of see it though. I kind of see that she may be one of those people, as she says, you know, she traveled around a lot. She played at bands and now has a kid and has kind of holed herself up in the house and works weekends and during the week all the time. So maybe she's just one of those people that goes to flea markets and picks up paintings that she might like and sticks them on the wall, but doesn't have any particular attachment to them. Maybe that's something about her character.
Well, she's a music teacher during the week, but then she works in the bar over the weekend to add a bit more cash to the coffers. Definitely.
Since we don't have any feedback, and I do happen to be sitting down with our other co-host, Chris, to record our second episode, I've asked him to talk about what his thoughts were for Punisher Season 2, Episode 1. Chris, you've seen this episode now. We're about to talk about Episode 2, but without any spoilers for that episode, what did you think of the first episode of this season of Punisher?
I'm enjoying it. I'm not rabid on it, I think, or ravenous. I think there was a shiny element to season 1 because we had been introduced to Frank in Daredevil. We wanted the backstory. There was a lot more intrigue, perhaps. So I think this is a very methodic opening kind of episode. They are setting up Frank as Pete with his background. We get the standard sex scene, so you know it's R-rated. But you also get the flashback, the traumatic Frank visions in bed. So from a story perspective, at the end of episode 1, I was curious where this is going, what is happening to, like, is this what we're going to get? But I can say it wasn't the same vapidness that I wanted in terms of going, oh, I really need episode 2 now. Give it to me. The reason I'm saying this now, and I'm putting a disclaimer in, I was watching it quite late. So that could be based on my energy levels. So as I progress through this season, I want to see where that kind of takes me. So I'm not saying it's that episode. Where I will say they have upped the ante amazingly is the fight choreography. They very much have taken a page from Daredevil, season 3, and they've taken that kind of very military combat fist fighty style of season 1 of Punisher, and they've kind of upped the ante, but I think even the camera work is a bit different this season from the kind of choreography.
Yeah.
So it's a lot larger, wider shots where we do get to see more of the assailants attacking Frank from their point of view. So I think of the gun scene.
Yeah.
One note, and I'm wondering if this will play a bigger part throughout the season, is seeing Frank's reaction to the innocents the bystanders getting hurt. So particularly, like, if we think of the tall bouncer guy taking the multiple bullets, and the visceral barking, grunting, barking, the woof.
I think we were calling it the grunt, yeah.
The grunt, yeah, from Frank. Based on, like, you can really see each innocent that's getting in the line of fire is amping up the ferocity, the viciousness of Frank. So I'm very interested if that's going to play more, or if they're purposely showing us the destruction of one of these fights can cause.
Yeah.
So, like, there is no innocence when Frank Castle is taking down a room of question mark people. Like people are going to get hurt, and we're going to see it now.
Right.
Because the last season was very much him versus other soldiers.
Yeah.
Not very much in open public spaces.
Yeah, and I think what we said was season 1 was really the big origin story. It's everything about Punisher and him getting revenge for the death of his family. So what's there to do now? What's the new story for season 2? So we will have to build up much slower in this season because we don't have the basic knowledge that we had going into season 1. Now we just have Frank on the road, doing whatever he wants to do. We said it felt a little bit like Jack Reacher. That concept of guy on the road walks into a situation, walks into a bar, sees a pretty girl, and then heads off in a big battle against the bad guys. So you never know what's going to happen in this season, but a fun start overall, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, the analogy I had in my head was Kung Fu. Do you remember Kung Fu?
Oh, yeah.
Where he was wandering America, and kind of like going into bars. It's the weekly dose.
Yep.
I knew they weren't going to do that.
Yeah.
But that was very much, Kung Fu was always, there was a bar, and he wandered in, and like there was bad ranchers, and he had to fix it.
Absolutely.
Like, I think this was very much even if you don't know very much about season 1, even if you didn't even watch season 1, you could enter it this way.
100%. You know, it's a way to bring on board the people that watched season 1 and people that didn't like season 1 and start them all over again and start them with a new Frank at the start of this season as well. That's really good. Any other thoughts about episode 1, Chris?
No, really looking forward to this season, and this episode. I really enjoyed episode 1. The ferociousness is not there. But I'm hoping that it will ignite. It's a slow burning ember, like Frank's violence and anger. It's just gonna bubble up inside me until I give it a 10 out of 10. Who knows? So looking forward to episode 2.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris. You'll be back on the next episode 2 of The Punisher. Back to myself and John on our final thoughts. John, only one thing left for us, really. Do you defend The Punisher Season 2, Episode 1?
I do. I defend this episode of The Punisher. I give it 3.5 broken bloody sinks out of 5. I think this is a really solid start. It reconnects us with Frank. It introduces Amy, who I think will be, certainly judging by some of the trailer elements, you know, she is central to this season. How central the man in black is going to be, who knows? But he's intriguing enough at this stage, you know, where his focus has switched from simply recovering a laptop to seeing someone with military training in action, and he's now suddenly got a taste for Frank's scent, effectively, and looks like he's going to go after him. We see Dina Madani, having a bit of a laugh at Ben Russo's expense.
Maybe.
Possibly. It was nice to have her in this first episode, and I think Ben Russo as well. Certainly given that, what he's likely to become in this season, I do wonder whether the guy in black may get overshadowed by Ben Russo's character,
Maybe.
If he manages to get himself out of hospital. So it was nice. But again, I think the important thing here was just how it was this episode of two halves, a really nice, considered, personal and intimate moment at the start where you get to reconnect with Frank Castle and with this lady Beth, as his history gets played out. And then we get that kinetic and frenetic rush of violence and fighting as the Punisher is unleashed, from Frank Castle. So this was a nice contrast here, and I really enjoyed it. So yes, I do defend this episode of The Punisher. Derek, do you defend this episode?
I do defend this episode. I think the point score that you've given for this episode is about right. 3.5 out of 5. Yeah, I think that's about where I'd put this episode. It's a good start to the show. And, it's the new normal for Frank. There's no reason why he's particularly going out to kill people or follow people. He's solved all of the issues that he had at the end of the first season. He's been sent out on the road. And now he's doing what a lot of people do, which is go and explore the world and whatever's around. I think there's some really good touches in here. It does feel a little bit like the Incredible Hulk going around all of America finding issues as he goes. I think that's a nice way of handling Frank Castle for this season too. And I like how quickly he falls back into his old ways. I'm just an a-hole who can't keep himself out of trouble. This isn't your fault, he says to Amy, which I think is a really interesting take on himself from Frank. And yet, lots of setup for the rest of the season. Lots of interesting stuff there with the Man in Black, with Beth, potentially. She says that her son's at home on his own. Does that mean Frank's going to have to stay around this town for a while? Is that what's going to pit him against the Man in Black? Because he's going to need to be close by? Is that what's going to happen? But loads of interesting stuff. And again, knowing that Ben Russo is alive and Dina Midani is still taunting him is nice to see. So we'll see a bit more of that as we get into the rest of the season.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, actually, that Beth calls out that her son is at home alone. So, yeah. It'll be interesting then. Is that where they kind of hunker down to defend ultimately? Is the Man in Black going to be chasing Frank in a short space of time, just simply in that area? And in fact, to be honest, the two of them seem to be in the same place at the same time at this moment. So, can't wait for episode 2. As always, a Marvel Netflix show lands. Just so excited to see what they have come up with these shows.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, John will not be here for episode 2, season 2 of The Punisher, as he is going to be traveling. Chris is going to be here for that episode. But you will be back, hopefully, for episode 3, as we get on for the rest of the podcast. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast at DefendersTVPodcast.com, or we have one specific feed for just the Punisher podcast, which is Punisher on Defenders TV Podcast. You'll also find that on various locations, but we do obviously encourage you to subscribe to the full Defenders TV podcast. Along with that, we're also going to be covering Doctor Strange. We're coming up on the 400th issue of the Doctor Strange comic book. That should be coming up at the end of the month on the 30th of January. We covered Into the Spider-Verse, the Spider-Man animated film. If you haven't seen that, go see it in the cinema if it's still playing close to you. It's really good. And also the final season of Gotham has started out. Season 5 of Gotham started out at the start of January. And you can listen to our thoughts as we've been covering every single episode of that over on GothamTVPodcast.com.
And also for your feedback, we'd love to hear your thoughts from the community. So head on over to Facebook, to facebook.com/groups/Defenders TV podcast to join the group. You can like our page over on Facebook, or of course you can head on over to Twitter at DefendersCast, and you can follow us there as well.
But as we mentioned, we want to hear your thoughts. Send them in to feedback@DefendersTVPodcast.com. You can let us know about your thoughts about the entire season. Just make sure you mark it that it is about the entire season. We don't watch ahead when we're recording our podcast, so we'd love not to be spoiled about episodes we haven't seen. If you want to send us feedback on any individual episode, again, just mark it which episode you want to talk about. And you can also leave us a voicemail over on our website at DefendersTVPodcast.com. Again, just mark it what episode you're talking about and we'll play it and discuss it on our podcast about that episode. Thanks so much for joining us, fellow Defenders. Really good to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, fellow Defenders, for coming back and joining us for this second season of The Punisher. We will be back with our review of The Punisher Season 2, Episode 2 very, very soon.
Talk to you next time, fellow Defenders.
Yes, thanks as always, fellow Defenders. It is a pleasure speaking with you. I'm off for a pancake breakfast with tons and tons of maple syrup. And when I roll back into the podcast booth for the next episode of The Punisher that I cover, then I'll speak with you again then.
Bye.
Bye.
I hear a lot of people saying the blues, but I'm gonna tell you what the blues is. When you ain't got no money. You got to lose.